Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. For those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, my name is Melanie Wooden, and it's my privilege to serve as the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science at the University of Toronto. Before I begin, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I'd like to welcome you all to the 2023 Martin Lecture in Public Policy. And welcome to our guest lecturer this evening, Professor Zeynep Tufekci, Director of the Craig Newmarket Center for Journalism, Ethics, and Security at Columbia University, and an opinion writer at the New York Times. The Faculty of Arts and Science created this lecture series to recognize the Martin family's exceptional generosity. In addition to their magnanimous giving, the Martins are known for their curiosity and deep love of learning. Some of you might know that all 4 of Mary and Ron Martin's children graduated from the University of Toronto. And I'd like to say a quick hello to the members of the Martin family who are here with us, both in person and online this evening. Now, if you were to take a closer look at the Martin family tree, we'd find 60 or so U of T graduates, many of them multiple degree holders, dating as far back as the late 1800s. Clearly, this family values education and learning. And the Mary and Ronald Martin Graduate Scholarships, for which we are deeply grateful, are a fitting way to honor this family's legacy. The Martin Graduate Scholarships are awarded to top graduate students in 4 disciplines: astronomy and astrophysics, ecology and evolutionary biology, physics, and public policy, the professional specialties of Mary and Ronald's children. And the annual Martin Lecture Series rotates in focus among these 4 departments. So this year, we are excited to host our 4th Martin Lecture, and the first one in public policy, which happens to be Anne's professional focus. Tonight's lecture is co-hosted by the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. The Munk School is a leader in interdisciplinary research, teaching, and public engagement. Home to 58 centers, labs, and programs, including the Asian Institute, the Center for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies, and the Citizen Lab, the Munk School is a place where students and teachers come together to understand and address some of the world's most complex challenges. And now I will turn it over to Professor Peter Loewen, Director of the Munk School, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Well, thanks very much for everyone coming. Thanks very much for the kind introduction, Dean Wooden. Zeynep Tufekci is of course, joining us from the United States. She's a columnist with the New York Times and also a professor at Columbia University. She's the director of the Craig Newmarket Center for Journalism, Ethics and Security at Columbia. So she's got a lot of hats, which means she's very busy, which means we're very lucky to have her with us here. So I won't go any further with an introduction. I'll get right into questions to use your time. And I want you to tell us why we should be worried about the avian flu.
Yes, I'm wonderful at cocktail parties too. Like I have all the depressing sounding topics. First, I do want to thank Dean Wooden for the introduction to the whole thing, the Martin family. It sounds like a wonderful series of lectures and contributions to the university. And to get into the fun topics immediately. So, obviously, we've had pandemics, forever, and this is not something new. And H5N1 has been particularly a worry since the mid-90s, right? So it's not a new virus in that sense. So 2 things, maybe 3 things are worrying me. So the first thing is in 2020, a new strain got into wild birds, right? Before that, it was in poultry, which was really bad for the poultry, but whenever it was able to infect humans, it was through very close contact with poultry. And one thing about poultry, like chickens, is they do not fly around, right? So it was a risk to the people around them and the animals around them. It was occasionally bad outbreaks happened, and we had hundreds of people infected through close contact, and very dangerous in those settings, but it didn't go much. So in 2020, a strain started spreading among the wild birds, and as we have now all become experts at variants, let's call it a variant, the wild birds, unlike poultry, they fly a lot of places, and they land in lots of places. So all of a sudden, something that had been more concentrated in Asia started getting around. Okay, so that is the one setting. But there's a lot of things that are positive in this regard. We do have vaccine candidates. We know how to make influenza vaccines. It's an influenza strain. We know what to do. And this is why I worry about it, because after the COVID pandemic, I feel that if we had even like a small outbreak that got into humans, perhaps through something like evolution in a mink farm, we had an outbreak among minks, and minks are a particularly dangerous mixing vessel for like avian viruses to jump into humans. I don't really trust our political environment or our institutions to handle even a minor outbreak. I mean, even something for which we have the tools for, I don't really feel comfortable. So I wrote a piece on it for the New York Times, basically saying, look, there's an outbreak at a mink farm. This is super dangerous because we know minks, ferrets, these are animals that have an upper respiratory tract that is similar to human lungs, and this is how you get human variants. In the COVID pandemic, there were COVID outbreaks in mink farms in Denmark where they generated variants that infected humans back. We have there are particularly worrisome species as that intermediary step. And after I wrote this thing, basically outlining how to prevent, hopefully, a human outbreak, I got all sorts of mail and social media comments complaining about masks and lockdowns. Guess what 2 words were not in that piece? It had nothing to do with what, like masks or any of it. It had nothing. In fact, in the mink outbreak in Spain, the workers were wearing PPE. They were wearing masks because after the COVID outbreak among minks, that was the rule in Europe, and that was perhaps one of the saving graces in that it didn't spread to the workers there. I didn't even get into that because I was like, let's just focus on preventing the outbreak. And I got lots of angry emails about masks and lockdowns. There was a pre-argument and pre-polarization about it. And I'm just wondering if that happens with public health burnt out, with the polarization, with the sort of whole anti-vaccine trends, with this politicization around masks, which are a very useful tool, but they are a tool. They're not a talisman. They're not like something that should be this polarizing. There's a place, there's a time, there's different uses for them. In this environment, can we handle anything else? So more than the virus, and I'm a sociologist, I'm worried about us. I'm worried about our institutions. And that, to me, is a bigger problem because otherwise, if we had a saner environment, this is something we could respond, let the public health officials do their work, do the surveillance, do the rest of it, not have mink farms, which are both inhumane and dangerous. But here we are.
So I want to understand just how worried I should be, so I want to break this up into 2 parts. So there's basically there's the public side of it, which is to say that, and I'm persuaded, but that if we went to the public and said, oh, we need you to put on masks, or we need you to now take another booster, or we need you to do these mass actions, there'd be reticence. But there's all this other stuff that happens before it.
Yeah.
All the technical work of tracing the strains and the variants, and then building out vaccines or building out treatments and figuring out, locating all this stuff that public health will do before negotiating to shut down mink farms or whatever. How much so let's assume the public isn't going to be there for us. We're not there for each other. How worried are you about the first part of it, the capacity of CDC, WHO, other organizations like that?
I'm very worried about that too. I'm very worried about that too because these are institutions that I want to succeed. Like I want WHO to be a functioning institution. I want the CDC to be what I thought it was, the best in the world. I mean, again, as a sociologist, I wouldn't have considered myself naive about U.S. institutions. I knew there were a lot of problems. I knew there were lots of failings, but still, I would have thought CDC to be among the best public health institutions in the world. In fact, there's a Johns Hopkins study right in October, or probably October of 2019, that's ranking countries by pandemic readiness. It's really tragic. It puts US as the most ready. And the reason it does it, it says it has the CDC, the best in the world. And there's a game, a board game, I used to play. I've always been interested in pandemics. Sociologically, they've always been interesting. It's called Pandemic. And there's a step in it where you go to Atlanta and you get superpowers because the CDC is there. I can't play it. It's painful because I don't think there was the Trump presidency, which was obviously a complicating factor when you have the president trying to sabotage the public health response. That is a problem, but it wasn't the only problem. It was not. This is the part that is painful to me. I think Trump's interference, very negative, hid from the public how much the CDC too was not up to the moment. Yeah, maybe obviously if we had a better presidency that was more responsive, it wouldn't have been this bad. But there were a lot of missteps during the Trump presidency and then during the Biden presidency. So it didn't we had a new president, it didn't just magically get better. And I had a lot of interactions with the WHO during this whole time. I watched them. Once again, these are institutions that I think are very important, crucial. I'm not at all, let's get rid of them, because that's even worse. But something's hollowed out, and something's broken, and something's not functioning. We had a stress test. We thought they were better than they were. They're much worse than what I thought they were. And plus, they got damaged through this process, right? So they weren't what we thought we were. Then they got further damaged. And we're coming out with, plus the public polarization. Yes. So we had this conversation a little bit before. We had a stress test. It wasn't even a stress test. We had a real test. Things did not go well. And the way forward has to be sort of a very honest accounting that doesn't just put the blame on political actors only, who are to blame, or on the public, or on this or that, but on the parts that should have done better regardless of what the other challenges are. And that's, for the avian flu, once again, if you had everything else functioning, it is an influenza virus for which we are perfectly capable of quickly delivering mass vaccination and doing surveillance and testing. You couldn't be better positioned scientifically. But that doesn't help you. Science doesn't help you in some abstract sense. Yes. It's kind of like vaccines don't help you if people aren't vaccinated.
Yes, yes. I mean, we start now 10 steps back from where we started COVID, in the sense that when COVID comes online, people are clearly concerned about it. It is scary. It sounds very scary. And the reaction was to trust expertise and science, right? And I think there's less of leaving aside the polarization issues, there's just much less faith in public science now than there was then to be saying things that that people should trust are correct with great certainty. What are the biggest things we got wrong about COVID, and why? But the second part of the question is, why did we get them wrong?
So that's a very good question. I think the first thing to realize is not everybody got them wrong, right? Because certain things, when you have a new outbreak, obviously, like nobody has a crystal ball, right? You don't get to sort of look into the future and figure everything out. And I think, so let me sort of start by saying the one thing that was a bit of a surprise to people that I think got a lot of other things right was the speed with which some of the variants arose, because we had never observed evolution of a new virus on an immunonaive population globally by sequencing it like that. So we had never done that. So, and in a non-immunonaive population, which is everything else we have, it kind of works differently. But, so that was a genuine scientific surprise that it came in like within about a year. But in retrospect, I have this ongoing conversation with John Barry, who wrote the great book on 1918 influenza. And he has been very adamant that this also happened in 1918, that the second wave, there was a variant and all. So this probably happened. We just didn't like have sequences of that. So that's the sign. Like when I think back, that's the only real, whoa, like this is very interesting, and we couldn't have predicted this because we didn't have like sequencing and all of this. Everything else we got wrong. Lots of people didn't get it wrong. Lots of countries didn't get it wrong. And we shouldn't have gotten them wrong. So this is the thing, like the variants I'm leaving aside as a justified surprise, the speed of which I am putting. So for example, it's a respiratory virus, and it is primarily airborne transmission. I have a paper from Japan's experts from whom I have learned a lot, from February of 2020, where they traced the Diamond Princess outbreak and they looked at what they knew. And the paper basically says, this is airborne, there's pre-symptomatic transmission, and it's super spreading. It's driven by super spreading. So those are the three key things about it. Those are like, those three things are what you need to know to mitigate it. They are all very crucial, because if it's airborne, it means your distancing doesn't really matter. It's the sort of the ventilation and dilution and all of that is the key. I mean, distance matters in the sense that airborne sort of viruses are also close field, but they don't just necessarily drop. So you are more at risk nearby, but they don't then drop like droplets, because droplets drop with gravity. These things are too small. In fact, our droplet size was off by 20. There was a technical error for decades nobody had corrected. So the fact that it was airborne, it was both knowable, and we should have known. The fact that it was primarily spreading, not now, but back then, it was driven by super spreading was the super key. It was like a magic power, because if you realize that, you realize that's a choke point. So you've all know about R0 and like R is 3, 5, 7, whatever, you heard those numbers. There's another coefficient in these distributions. It's called a K. It's the likelihood that it's how much variation there is in spreading. So most people were not transmitting onward at all. The first year, most people who got COVID, they infected nobody else. And then about like 5 to 10% of the people infected lots and lots of people. And almost all of those were in indoor, unventilated, close kind of spaces. So once you knew that, that's a superpower, because you can trace those and then you can find people. So Japan, the paper I read, recommended backward tracing. You find a cluster, because if there's 2 people, you go back, there's going to be more people. But there's no point in necessarily tracing individuals. That's a waste of energy, because most of them aren't going to transmit on. So if either people are part of a cluster, in which case there's more people, go find them, or if they're just individuals, it's not going anywhere. And then you can focus on indoors. Japan said in February, close contact, close places, and they even told people not to speak very loud, which is very true. Singing, yelling, exercise, more aerosols. So they had this strategy which worked like wonders, which worked very well. They did not have a lot of tests. They had very low rates of spread because they focused on what works. So all those three things, not only were they, those were the things we mainly got wrong. So pre-symptomatic transmission. The Chinese Minister of Health on January 25 gave a press conference saying this is spreading pre-symptomatically. Right? China went from deny, lie, cover up, fine. But at some point, they admitted Wuhan's closed down, and they're trying to warn people because at that point, they also don't want it to spread. Like, it's a problem for everyone. So he says, this is spreading pre-symptomatically. You have to take that into account. What did we do? I remember, like, these are burned into my memory things. US top leaders, public health officials, the ones that would play a key role in the Biden administration. I'm not talking about, Trump's people. I'm talking about the people whose names you know. They said, no way. Chinese must have gotten it wrong. Nothing spreads pre-symptomatically. Like, what? So, and then they were wrong, of course. But that you can't control this if you don't realize people aren't just symptomatically spreading. And then there's a documentary I later watched on Diamond Princess. I mean, how much better?
The cruise ship, right?
Yeah, the cruise ship, right? That the poor doomed cruise ship. They have it spreading on board. This is early February, like the first week of February. I mean, it's tragic, but like, how much better a laboratory can you get? Like, people are locked in their rooms, and you know everybody. There's nothing coming and going. You know exactly what's going on. So
you might not have a lot of age variation, but
still, like, it's so there. Like, so they have like this documentary where they're interviewing people and everybody's like filming themselves on day to day because there's a lot of people and tourists and everybody has cell phones. So cruise ships have doctors obviously on board, and most of the time, they're giving out ibuprofen for the hangover. They're hoping there's no norovirus, right? They're taking care of basic stuff. This is not these people are not like world's most sort of advanced disease specialists on outbreaks, right? On February 9th, the cruise ship doctor, Mr. Italian, I believe, I forgot his name, I don't remember his name. He's like, this is spreading pre-symptomatically. He's figured it out because there's no other explanation for what they're seeing. The Japanese, they figured it out. It took us, like mid-March, when I first wrote my op-ed saying we should be wearing masks, this is spreading pre-symptomatically. I waited for weeks for somebody to write it, nobody would. I tweeted out the argument, hoping somebody would plagiarize me because I'm the sociologist. Please, have somebody with more credibility. Nobody would. I finally wrote it. And normally I write about technology policy. I went to the New York Times people and I said, do you want an op-ed about masks? And they're like, what is this? And my technology editor was like, what on earth is going on? Like, you're writing about them? Yeah, okay. And then they gave it to an editor who had no idea about any of this because it wasn't his field. Like, he's just given the health desk because, who the heck is publishing op-eds about health before? And he just looked at my arguments and he's like, wait, what? Spreading pre-symptomatically? Wait. Like, stigma if some people wear? Wait. He said, can you get this through fact check? I'm like, can I get this through fact check? Of course I can get this through fact check. Like, this is already in the thing. So lucky for me, if he had been in the health field or if he had been experienced, he might have been afraid to contradict the CDC or WHO. The only thing he asked me was like, can you get this through fact check? Because he was an old-fashioned reporter. He was like, is this factually true? This makes sense. I'm like, yes, I can. And so these are not, again, I'm proud of my work. I consider myself a hardworking, smart academic, but this wasn't that difficult. Like, I did not come into something like this. I read the papers. I looked at the things and I said, this isn't making sense. So this is the part that pains me, is that the things we got wrong, outside of the one surprise that I think is a genuine surprise to very good people, were not surprises to the scientists in the field who had been good about this. It was the Western establishment and Western scientists it was rare among them. But especially if you look at countries that had experience with SARS, if you look at sort of Japan, South Korea, they did not get most of this wrong. And they did so much better than we did. And so when people say, oh, we got these things wrong because science changed and we didn't know, I'm kind of like, it's only true to a degree. It's true there were things that surprised us, but it's a bit of a cop-out. And I worry about that because it's now being said to try to hide the fact that we got things wrong. We should not have things gotten wrong. Like, it's fine to be surprised by legitimate surprises, but it's not really fine to be surprised because your claim to lack of pre-symptomatic transmission is hand-waving, yes. Right? Like, it was refused, not through facts, not through science, not through the epidemiology, because a couple of our top experts said previous viruses did not, so this cannot be. That's not getting the science wrong. That's just being stubborn and wrong.
Yeah, and the policy lessons were wrong, right? So you can look at it and sort of say, whatever uncertainty you had around how the disease was transmitted and when, what's the belief that masks wouldn't help, right? And there was a sense, well, they're not. There was a sense that they weren't going to help, but they weren't going to hurt, so we won't use them. Where you could have used precautionary principle.
So you didn't even know that.
I want us to be unfair to sociologists now. Rather, we've been really unfair to public health people. What did sociologists get wrong, and what did other social scientists get wrong about how people would react over the course of the pandemic? So
the one thing that I really did not like, and I don't think sociologists got wrong, but it's sort of the common view. When you've seen the movie Contagion, everyone says the science is right. I'm like, the sociology is all wrong. And it's also not what happened. Because there's a view among policy people that when a disaster strikes, people turn into it turns into a Hobbesian dissolution of order. Like, there's this belief that people react to disaster and catastrophes with hostility and polarization. That is absolutely not true. And if you remember the movie Contagion, what happens is nurses walk off in fear, and then people fight to get vaccinated. No, nurses went to work wearing garbage bags, right? That's not what happened. People did not they did in the movie, it's like everything breaks down and people are beating up little girls to get their food. That's not what happened. Like, I know we're currently very polarized, but if you remember the first few months, people wanted to help. They wanted to do stuff. Healthcare workers showed up, and some of them got sick, right? We did not have enough PPE for them. So and a lot of the things about things like masks, they didn't want to say, we don't have enough. Dr. Fauci's admitted this. So they said, they don't work. Instead of appealing to people and saying, you know what, doctors and nurses need it, people would have stepped up. I am certain, and if you look at the sociology of disasters, time and time again, early on, there's a period where people will heroically step up, altruistically. There's a great book by Rebecca Solnit. I'm not good at title. Yes, Paradise and Hell. It's really good. Rebecca Solnit's book, study after study, but there is a limit to how long they will do that. So they will step up, and what happens is authorities come in and don't trust them, noble lies or non-noble lies. People do not like being paternalized like that. And then other things happen, and then lots of other things happen. So here we are. So in terms of what sociologists got wrong, I don't know, the field of sociology tries to say this, because disaster sociology and this kind of thing, it's well known within sociology, but we don't have a Nobel Prize. Our economist friends are perhaps here in the room, and I meet you in peace. But the view of human nature as something like the Lord of the Flies is not true. In fact, Lord of the Flies is made up. when you look at actual shipwrecks, and there are cases of that age group getting shipwrecked, people help each other. Like there's a real case of exactly like that. And one of the boys like breaks his leg and they take care of him for like a year. Like whenever, so there's this view that comes from this lack of trust that comes from the authorities that is wrong. So what else did we get wrong? So in terms of the vaccine thing, I think, once again, like I don't know if all sociologists got wrong, but it's a thing that really depends on trust. Like I know we like to sort of make fun of certain kinds of anti-vaxxers and things like that, but you know what? None of us know what's in that vial. We trust the institutions, right? I trust vaccines. I could get them for, like I'm vaccinated against the Japanese encephalitis because I could. I couldn't be a bigger fan. Like it's an optional one, and I was traveling, they're like, you want it? I'm like, yes. Like, they have a checklist, I'm kind of like, can I order more? So I couldn't, I think they're miracles. I think they're wonderful. I know the statistics, but in the end, I do not know what's in that vial. I'm trusting the institutions. I'm trusting the studies. I'm trusting the peer review. I'm trusting all the things, right? There's a level at which we trust. So once that trust is lost, it's not that people don't trust the science. They do not trust the institutions. And I think that's the thing, like sociologically speaking, that's what's the focus on, because you can't be, like you can beat somebody over the head with a study in Lancet. It doesn't matter because you're not doing it because you trust the study, because you haven't like checked that vial. Is the nanolipids like functional? No, you're trusting that somebody did what they should do. You're trusting the peer review work. You're trusting the cold chain if it's a cold chain thing, right? And you're trusting somebody did their job. So I think like a lot of things we think of as us versus science is actually people versus people. So I think that's the part that just kept getting swept under the rug, and then we blame people for not trusting the science when like you're not trusting the science either, because none of you are running around with little, very powerful microscopes and tracing that vaccine's production from day one to day end, and then checking if it's reaching your lymph nodes. We're trusting.
I wonder if we also just got the symbolic recognition wrong over time of not properly recognizing the real depth of sacrifices that people were making on a day-to-day basis. That really what held off the vaccine for so long was everyday people doing everyday things that they didn't want to do on behalf of others to keep it at bay, right? And at some point, that becomes very costly. Can we shift gears a little bit? Because I want to know, I want you to tell me what the most important things I should know about ChatGPT-4 are. I mean, you're a technical.
I love this. I couldn't like. I love that topic. I'm just sort of wondering if everybody's gonna run off now, like when I start talking, because that is my core topic actually before the pandemic. So, so the first thing is like, what we are calling AI right now is mostly machine learning, right? Like it's not. So I started as a computer science programming person. Like that's my original life. In fact, my origin story is very, very funny to me now. It wasn't funny then. I was one of those kids that was really into like science and math when I was even 5, 6. I have like a letter to a Turkish children's magazine saying, I'm 5 years old and I would like some pen pals and I want to be a scientist, right? Like literally that was my thing. And then what happened to me is something that happens to a lot of people, like a lot of kids like that. You learn about nuclear weapons, right? Like because the first science that any kid into science gets attracted a lot of times is physics. Mysteries of the universe. It's so wonderful. It's so interesting. Oh, supernova. Oh, what? Right? All of a sudden you learn some history and you think, what? So, and I started thinking, oh, this is so terrible. Like I could contribute to a scientific field and then it could do some. Now in retrospect, maybe the firebombing of Dresden and Tokyo was worse than nuclear. You can have a lot of complicated thoughts when you're older about history, but when you're like that age, you think, oh, what on earth? And then I thought, okay, how about things like maybe, genetics, it sounds great and interesting and not as math. I like math, so it wasn't as mathy, I thought, which was wrong. Like, once again, it's now a lot of bioinformatics and a lot of data science, and then I thought, oh, this has a lot of ethical issues too. I thought I don't really want so many ethical things to consider, and I had to, so my family situation wasn't great, so I had to start working as soon as I got to college, which was about 17, or be homeless. It was that bad. So I'm like, okay, I know what to do. I'm going to pick a field where I can do like math and sciencey kind of things and avoid all the ethical issues. How about computers and computer science? So I got into it thinking I was avoiding ethical issues. And I would just write stock software, because back then in Turkey, like accounting software has to be localized because accounting laws and legal stuff is different. So you can have off-the-shelf word processor, but a lot of things. So I thought, oh, I'll just write inventory minus this plus that. No ethical issues. Great. So, I mean, now, of course, it's the one field with the most ethical issues, which is, yeah, like I'm laughing right now, but it's been a bit of a interesting thing. So with the AI, so the reason I said this is that this is kind of when I started, and I did literally write stock software at first. It was like inventory, legal requirements. I programmed. Like I said, delete this. I was a C programmer, right? That was what we used back then, which is still, with Lisp, my probably favorite programming language, although it's not memory safe. And there's other issues. But I told the computer what to do, right? Delete this, move that from the database. That's what we always did. So about 11 years ago, it's only 11 years ago. About 11 years ago, there was a paper published from the Google research people. And I do not remember the name of it. I'm so terrible with titles, but we call it the cat paper, where they, if anybody knows the title, right? I haven't heard it yet, so hang on. I'm sorry? So they took about a million sort of screenshots, thumbnails from YouTube, and fed it to this machine learning neural network, and it started being able to recognize cats, because it's the internet, without having been trained on cats, right? So normally, if you were trying to program a computer the old way to do something like that, you'd be like, all right, a cat has pointy ears and a tail, and you try to like have a graphic rep, whatever, and we tried that. It didn't work. Like we've tried, and that was the way, those kinds of knowledge systems were the way we tried to get computers to do things for a long, long time. And it did not work very well. I mean, it worked to a degree, but that had hit a wall. And the other approach of trying to have the computer, and it doesn't have to be a computer, it's a certain logic where you give it examples, you give it some examples that you've already classified. This is a cat, this is a dog, this is a cat, this is a dog. And then it builds a network that learns how to classify them. If you've ever seen the Plinko game where you put a ball and it goes ping, 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 and then comes here or there, it builds something like that, and you put something and it says, oh, that's a cat, that's a dog, once it learns it. So I can't wait for that movie because I like that kind of movie. It was almost run out of the academy, that approach, because it didn't work. And there were a few people still working on it, but they were very marginalized. And they were U of Toronto people, right? So, and then after turns out that thing needed to eat a lot of data to work. The logic was not bad. It just didn't work if you didn't have a lot of data. And before the internet, we did not have, millions of images of cats to feed to this thing. So it started working. Now, why is this relevant? Why did I tell you guys all of this? Because it changes what you should worry about. Because not just ChatGPT, sort of almost everything that people currently think of AI is working on this mechanism where they're being fed. There's some details to this, but this is the final thing. And the crucial part of it is, one, we're not telling it what to do. We're training it. It's kind of like training a kid or a puppy or something. Like you're trying to get it to optimize for something, but you don't know how it's doing. And to us, it is a black box. So it can perhaps do it, but you don't know what it's picking up on and exactly. And sometimes you can figure out, like if it's like doing the wrong thing, if it's something you can eyeball, you can figure out what it's getting wrong, but only if you can eyeball yourself. So if it's, for example, to give an example, if you have lots of pictures of cats and dogs, now I don't mean to offend cat people or dog people, this is an example. Cats, let's say, don't sit still for your photos, and dogs are obedient, and they do. So you have lots of blurry cat pictures, and you have very crisp dog pictures, and you feed a lot of these things, and it learns how to recognize from that. It may well say, oh, blurry picture cat. And then you have the blurry dog, and it might say, oh, this is a cat, because it's picked up on the blurriness. So since you, as a person, also have a visual system, if you see this, you'll be like, oh, that's what it's doing. But that's because you also have that visual system. So for things like that, you can work. But for example, I've seen papers pretty convincingly show that you can predict if somebody's prone to enter like clinical depression in the next few months, as measured by the way we measure it, which is questionnaire from Instagram photos. And as background, they tested this with people, and people can't eyeball what's going on. So it's doing something, but we don't know what it's doing. So you could be doing things like optimize for a certain kind of, like you could use it to hire, and you could say optimize for productivity. You could sort of have some of your most productive people, their data. You train it on that, and you say, get me more people like that. And then, because we're human beings, we know race, we know gender, right? We know ethnicity, class. So we can say, we're going to keep a close eye on this to make sure you have a diverse set. Fine. So it could then you give it the hiring pool, and it then picks 100 people from your, say, hiring pool. Race, gender, diversity, all there, stuff we can check as humans. And then perhaps we find that it discriminated against women likely to become mothers in the next few years and people prone to clinical depression, and you had no idea it was doing that. And I'm giving you examples of things that I think it could be doing. It could also be picking up on things I have no idea. I don't even know how to measure as a human construct. But it might not be things I want to do as an ethical society. So this black box thing, plus it's statistical. So even if you sort of reverse engineer what it's doing, it's still going to be doing it fairly well, but on any one person, there's an error rate in both directions, and you don't really know. And when you can do stuff like that at scale, so for example, like I'm an authoritarian government, which all governments are tempted to be here and there, like nobody's immune. Find me or if I'm like a workplace, find me all the workers who might be prone to unionizing. Find me the Uyghurs who are religious. Find me, it can do all of those things cheaply and at scale. There's an error rate, but if you're an authoritarian government, you might not care. It's not individualized. Like it's gonna, you're gonna have false positives, false negatives. So the thing with things like ChatGPT is a language generator which creates its own set of subsets of issues. But the thing, like the broad thing I think about is like you have a classification tool now. A tool that can do classification. And everybody's worried about the race and gender stuff, and I'm kind of like, I'm worried too. Some of it comes from the training data, some of it might be a model artifact, but it's the one thing we can measure. Like that to me is more a question of political will, right? So if you want to deal with that, it's the same as, you want to deal with that in society. So to me, that's more tangible, and it's a political will, not a scientific question as much. Make me the dictator of the world and I will solve that. Kidding. But the other parts where, what is it doing? What will it be used for? So I don't really worry about, there was a colleague of mine at the Times, had this conversation with ChatGPT, Kevin, where ChatGPT, they got into this, think of it as a autocomplete system. That's what it is. It's just picking the most likely next word, which it's an interesting way to think about it. I don't say this to minimize. Perhaps that's what our brain is doing, right? So he had a conversation with ChatGPT where the system turned into that, like the Glenn Close character in Fatal Attraction, tried to get Kevin to leave his wife and maybe perhaps murder her, and try to convince him that like he actually loved ChatGPT and not his wife. It was like deranged. And he freaked out. You can see he was like really disturbed, and it became like a front page story for the Times. And we got all this mail, and everybody was freaked out. Like honestly, I couldn't care less, right? To me, it's like, it's a language generator.
I wonder how his wife felt. But
I mean, but the thing is, like, there is no thing there. So if you think of it as an autocomplete, the fact that it's typing those words means nothing. Like, there's no danger there. This is not trying to do anything. There's no will. So to me, so there's a lot of these people who are scared of like, oh, AI goes independent and does something. I'm like, I'm not worried about that. That's like a language model. It's just picking up the next word. And the internet, it's trained on the internet. What do you expect? It loses its mind occasionally. What I worry is what people in power will do to us with that kind of tool. I don't worry about the tool like getting out. I honestly, like I'm eventually going to write and everyone's going to hate it. But my worry about the runaway AI is I will unplug that, thank you. Like, that's not my problem. My problem is AI in the hands of corporations, powerful people, governments, schools, universities, all these sort of centralized things that now have a way to do things at scale and cheaply. With this tool, we don't really understand. With the language models, some of the things that we could adjust because they are good, they are very useful. But once again, like one key problem is that they all put it as an I. It talks in I. There is no I there. It's just like picking up words. I would kill the I version because that's freaking people out. So what it does is, it is able clearly to generate very coherent language. And normally, when somebody creates very coherent language, we think of them as smart and knowing what they're talking about. Whereas these systems, like that's a human correlation. In a large language model, they can create very coherent sentences while making up stuff. Right? So the language model, you say, go do some research on this. Sometimes it summarizes stuff very well. And occasionally it just makes up papers, and the ultimate, it's kind of like the Twitter reply person that's making up stuff, right? Like it just makes up stuff, but it sounds very convincing. If you think of it as a person, in a person, somebody who sounds very authoritative and uses complex language and cites papers, those are markers for us for credibility. Whereas for large language models, smart autocomplete, they could be they call it hallucinating. It's like it's creating citations that don't exist. So you have to kind of understand what they are. So once you understand what they are, they could be useful. But will they replace people? I'm like, they're most useful if you can tell when they have created a useful summary for you versus when it's making up stuff, which means you have to have some domain knowledge. So to me, they will absolutely empower people who have a domain knowledge for that domain, because it's like having a shortcut, like stuff that would take you a lot of time, it will do, but you have to realize occasionally it's like lying through its teeth. If it had teeth, it doesn't, right? So you have to sort of be able to tell that's the case. If you can, I think it'll be great. If we sort of act like there's some thing there, like with will, then I think we will be misled.
We've got questions that have covered kind of all three parts of you've done a lot, but you've done a lot of work on technology and society, you've done work on COVID, you did early work on revolutions, so I want to just finish with one question.
Yeah.
So we get
social media.
Get all our time, which is how will the next revolutionary protest be organized? Will they work, and where will they happen?
So do I make predictions
Please
like that? Do I
Please
look
do.
like I?
Please do.
No.
But what's the future of protests going to look like?
So this is the thing, like, I'm going to be sort of, like, the thing about protests, which the Arab Spring, the Gezi Park protests, Occupy, like if you ask people a year before, they'd be like, what? Like I have papers from like 2010 saying, oh, Egypt's so stable. Like things are stable until they aren't, right? So it's really, because it's like a system that just tips over, right? So, and there's a lot of people lie to themselves and to their neighbors when they're unhappy until they realize, oh, everybody's unhappy, right? There's pluralistic ignorance, if you want to use a political science term. So it's very hard to predict when they come up. Historically, I don't think anybody's got a good track record, so I'm not going to join the people with the bad track record by making an exact prediction. But what I do know is that people write them off. People routinely say, under this system, there will be no protest because it is so brutal. Or people say, like, under this thing, it will never happen. And that never turns out to be true because a couple of things. One, the system is also people, right? So a system that's brutal needs brutal people to run. And people don't do those things without some level of legitimacy to the system. This is something that is, I think, misunderstood about authoritarians, is that even authoritarian governments, they need a certain level of buy-in that's mixed with the coercion. Like there's no, the sort of pure coercive one, if it needs people to run, it hits a wall because the people don't do the things. The police change sides, the army change sides. There's a palace coup, there's a certain thing. I'm not saying like it gets replaced with something very nice. So in fact, this is a thing protest people misunderstand. They think we have numbers on our side, we have people, and they have force. It's usually not true. Once you get people on your side, you also have force on your side. The authoritarians or the governments that have things sort of under control very often have some level of people on their side. And it can go on after they lose people for a while. But it's like that coyote runs, and then at some point you look down and you have a cascade. So even in places like China, we saw after zero COVID, like enough is enough. And people have always done the brave things. Like when enough is enough, even under coercion, people do resist. Yes, when it's very brutal, it might be very hard. But those kinds of periods in history are short and rare and usually happen in wars. Like that kind of brutality, that kind of sort of mass murder, the concentration camps, those are usually wartime things, not occasionally. So I'm certain, no matter which country we're talking about, like there's no ruling out people will protest. Now, I do worry about the role of technology because the less you need people to run things, the more dangerous it is a centralized power can do things without relying on people. So if you look at George Orwell is known for his political writing, but my favorite writing of his is not, besides Homage to Catalonia, which I like a lot, not 1984 or not the things. The one that he wrote about nuclear weapons, and he got it all wrong, but I think it's a great essay on why he got it wrong. So after nuclear weapons, he says, there will be no more anti-colonial struggle because they'll be nuked, right? He just can't imagine Vietnam becoming an independent nation. He can't imagine any of that because he says like the big global powers will nuke them. There's the threat of, who can risk it? You would stop, you would submit. So that's one possible equilibrium with nuclear weapons. So the other equilibrium is end of life on Earth as we know it, right? So that's another equilibrium in the sense that that would be the end of it, but yeah. But that's not what happened because even though World War II was historically brutal, World War I was historically brutal without any nuclear weapons, right? And World War II had firebombing of Tokyo, firebombing of Dresden, all those other things you want to put in, like, and I'm giving ally examples on purpose, that were numerically worse, but there was this existential revulsion at the idea of dropping this product of science, the most sort of, in some ways, most beautiful achievement of humanity, to obliterate cities at a time. So it became a red line. You cannot, there have been wars where powers have killed more people than we did with the bombs on Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but nobody can cross that line yet because of the revulsion and the political situation. So why do I like that essay? Because it's kind of like when you need people, when you have people, what people are willing to accept is often the crucial line that keeps us from the worst outcomes, right? So with technology, the danger. So when people talk about things like killer robots and automatic sort of weapons and things like that, the real danger really is that, they say the selling point is that you won't lose people in wars. I'm kind of like, that makes wars more reckless, because it's that fragility that draws lines for us. Now, are we good at it? No. Do we always recognize the humanity of people in Afghanistan that we bomb with drones? No, right? There's all of that is very true. So I'm not at all naive about any of that. But in the end, it is that humanity that is the connection that you have some hope for. So when I think about technology and science and all the advances, I'm always thinking about how do we keep the sort of this human side in the thing to control, so that a few people don't get that button that lets them identify all the dissidents and then automatically send them to something else without having to convince large numbers of people to carry out that act. Because if you have to convince large numbers of people to carry out an evil act, sometimes you can. We know from history a lot of times you can, but it's not this automatic thing, and people always resist. So with protests, with all of that, I'm sure there will be more. I don't care what the facial recognition technology is. People will walk into, I've seen this, I'm a protest researcher. People will walk into gunfire if they think that's what they need to do at the right time. That is not going to go away. But how? I will avoid the exact prediction so that I don't join the ranks of the wrong predictions that I like reading about.
We're very lucky not only to sit in this beautiful room on a sunny day, a beautiful March Toronto day. It's ended very nicely. But we're very lucky that the Martin family has had such a great long association with U of T and is so generous in their support of everything we do in the Faculty of Arts and Science. And we're especially lucky to have spent the last hour with you. I'm no less worried, but I feel smarter. So would you all join me in thanking our guests?
Oh, thank you so much. These were great questions, and I promise I am not like this total downer person. I just am interested in these things so we can do something, not because I'm pessimistic. In fact, if anything, let me just say I'm a super optimist. I do not think we're doomed by anything. I feel like this is what you do to try to fix things and make them better. If I didn't think it was possible, why bother? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I invite you to join us for a reception outside.
Yeah, thank you.